clothes I wear, or of my height, or of my walk, or what? Well, damn and confound him!" finished Basil, snapping his fingers. "We must be patient," said Masha, threading her needle. "You are so—" "It is my nerves that won't stand it, that's all." At this moment the door of Grandmamma's room banged, and Gasha's angry voice could be heard as she came up the stairs. "There!" she muttered with a gesture of her hands. "Try to please people when even they themselves do not know what they want, and it is a cursed life, sheer hard labour, and nothing else. If only a certain thing would happen, though God forgive me for thinking it." "Good evening, Agatha Michaelovna," said Basil, rising to greet her. "You here?" she answered brusquely as she stared at him. "That is not very much to your credit. What do you come here for? Is the maid's room a proper place for men?" "I wanted to see how you were," said Basil soothingly. "I shall soon be breathing my last, that's how I am!" cried Gasha, still greatly incensed. Basil laughed. "Oh, there's nothing to laugh at when I say that I shall soon be dead. But that's how it will be, all the same. Just look at the drunkard! Marry her, would he? The fool! Come, get out of here!" And with a stamp of her foot on the floor, Gasha retreated to her own room, and banged the door behind her until the window rattled again. For a while she could be heard scolding at everything, flinging dresses and other things about, and pulling the ears of her favourite cat. Then the door opened again, and Puss, mewing pitifully, was flung forth by the tail. "I had better come another time for tea," said Basil in a whisper. "At some better time for our meeting." "No, no," put in Madesha. "I'll go and fetch the urn at once." "I mean to put an end to things soon," went on Basil, seating himself beside Masha as soon as ever Madesha had left the room. "I had much better go straight to the Countess, and say so and so, or I will throw up my situation and go off into the world. Oh dear, oh dear!" "And am I to remain here?" "Ah, there's the difficulty. That's what I feel so badly about. You have been my sweetheart so long, you see. Ah, dear me!" "Why don't you bring me your shirts to wash, Basil?" asked Masha, after a pause, during which she had been inspecting his wristbands. At this moment Grandmamma's bell rang, and Gasha issued from her room again. "What do you want with her, you impudent fellow?" she cried as she pushed Basil, who had risen at her entrance, before her towards the door. "First you lead a girl on, and then you want to lead her further still. I suppose it amuses you to see her tears. There's the door now. Off you go. We want your room, not your company. And what good can you see in him?" she went on, turning to Masha. "Has not your uncle been walking into you to-day already? No, she must stick to her promise, forsooth. I will have no one but Basil. Fool that you are!" "Yes, I will have no one but him. I'll never love any one else. I could kill myself for him!" poor Masha burst out, the tears suddenly gushing forth. For a while I stood watching her as she wiped away those tears. Then I fell to contemplating Basil attentively, in the hope of finding out what there was in him that she found so attractive. Yet, though I sympathised with her sincerely in her grief, I could not for the life of me understand how such a charming creature as I considered her to be could love a man like him. "When I become a man," I thought to myself as I returned to my room, "Petrovskoe shall be mine, and Basil and Masha my servants. Some day, when I am sitting in my study and smoking a pipe, Masha will chance to pass the door on her way to the kitchen with an iron, and I shall say, 'Masha, come here,' and she will enter, and there will be no one else in the room. Then suddenly Basil, too, will enter, and on seeing her will cry, 'My sweetheart is lost to me!' and Masha will begin to weep. Then I shall say, 'Basil, I know that you love her, and that she loves you. Here are 1,000 roubles for you. Marry her, and may God grant you both happiness.' Then I shall leave them together." Among the countless thoughts and fancies which pass, without logic or sequence, through the mind and the imagination, there are always some which leave behind them a mark so profound that, without remembering their exact subject, we can at least recall that something good has passed through our brain, and try to retain and reproduce its effect. Such was the mark left upon my consciousness by the idea of sacrificing my feelings to Masha's happiness, seeing that she believed that she could attain it only through a union with Basil. Chapter 19. Boyhood. Perhaps people will scarcely believe me when I tell them what were the dearest, most constant objects of my reflections during my boyhood. So little did those objects consort with my age and position. Yet, in my opinion, contrast between a man's actual position and his moral activity constitutes the most reliable sign of his genuineness. During the period when I was leading a solitary and self-centered moral life, I was much taken up with abstract thoughts on man's destiny, on a future life, and on the immortality of the soul, and with all the ardor of inexperience strove to make my youthful intellect solve those questions, the questions which constitute the highest level of thought to which the human intellect can tend, but a final decision of which the human intellect can never succeed in attaining. I believe the intellect to take the same course of development in the individual as in the mass, as also that the thoughts which serve as a basis for philosophical theories are an inseparable part of that intellect, and that every man must be more or less conscious of those thoughts before he can know anything of the existence of philosophical theories. To my own mind, those thoughts presented themselves with such clarity and force that I tried to apply them to life, in the fond belief that I was the first to have discovered such splendid and invaluable truths. Sometimes I would suppose that happiness depends not upon external causes themselves, but only upon our relation to them, and that, provided a man can accustom himself to bearing suffering, he need never be unhappy. To prove the latter hypothesis I would, despite the horrible pain, hold out a Tatistchev's dictionary at arm's length for 5 minutes at a time, or else go into the store-room and scourge my back with cords until the tears involuntarily came to my eyes. Another time, suddenly bethinking me that death might find me at any hour or any minute, I came to the conclusion that man could only be happy by using the present to the full, and taking no thought for the future. Indeed, I wondered how people had never found that out before. Acting under the influence of the new idea, I laid my lesson books aside for 2 or 3 days, and reposing on my bed gave myself up to novel-reading, and the eating of gingerbread and honey, which I had bought with my last remaining coins. Again, standing one day before the blackboard, and smearing figures on it with honey, I was struck with the thought, why is symmetry so agreeable to the eye? What is symmetry? Of course it is an innate sense, I continued, yet what is its basis? Perhaps everything in life is symmetry? But no. On the contrary, this is life." And I drew an oblong figure on the board. "And after life the soul passes to eternity." Here I drew a line from one end of the oblong figure to the edge of the board. "Why should there not be a corresponding line on the other side? If there can be an eternity on one side, there must surely be a corresponding one on the other. That means that we have existed in a previous life, but have lost the recollection of it." This conclusion, which seemed to me at the time both clear and novel, but the arguments for which it would be difficult for me at this distance of time to piece together, pleased me extremely, so I took a piece of paper and tried to write it down. But at the first attempt such a rush of other thoughts came whirling through my brain that I was obliged to jump up and pace the room. At the window, my attention was arrested by a driver harnessing a horse to a water-cart, and at once my mind concentrated itself upon the decision of the question, into what animal or human being will the spirit of that horse pass at death? Just at that moment Woloda passed through the room, and smiled to see me absorbed in speculative thoughts. His smile at once made me feel that all that I had been thinking about was utter nonsense. I have related all this as I recollect it, in order to show the reader the nature of my cogitations. No philosophical theory attracted me so much as scepticism, which at one period brought me to a state of mind verging upon insanity. I took the fancy into my head that no one nor anything really existed in the world except myself, that objects were not objects at all, but that images of them became manifest only so soon as I turned my attention upon them, and vanished again directly that I ceased to think about them. In short, this idea of mine, that real objects do not exist but only one's conception of them, brought me to Schelling's well-known theory. There were moments when the influence of this idea led me to such vagaries as, for instance, turning sharply round, in the hope that by the suddenness of the movement